Hi, this is Dave Faulkner from the Hoodoo Gurus.
What's my sin? What's my sin? Tell me what's my sin?
And you're listening to the New Wave Music Podcast.
You're tuned into the New Wave Music Podcast, your go-to destination for exclusive interviews, album reviews, and the latest music news. And now, here are your hosts, Steve and Don.
Well, welcome back to the New Wave Music Podcast. Once again, Don, it's great to have you back on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So the first album we're going to be jumping into is from Morrissey. Now, if you don't remember Morrissey, he, of course, was with the Smiths, who had such hits as There's a Light That Never Goes Out.
And if a 10-ton shark kills the both of us, to die by your side, well, the pleasure, the privilege is mine. Oh, there is a light and it never goes out. There is a light and it never goes out.
Morrissey's gone on to have quite the prolific solo career, with such hits as Every Day Is Like Sunday,
Every day is like Sunday. Every day is silent and gray.
Suede Head,
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Why do you come here when you know it makes things hard for me? When you know, oh, why do you come?
and The More You Ignore Me, The Closer I Get.
The more you ignore me, the closer I get. You're wasting your time. The more you ignore me, the closer I get. You're wasting your time.
So, Don, today we're going to be jumping into Morrissey's latest album, which is his 14th studio album, Makeup Is a Lie. All right, Don, well, ready or not, are you ready to jump into the latest release from Morrissey?
Yeah, well, this is this is a complicated time. I mean, I've been a huge Morrissey fan for most of my life. I've seen him live many times, and I've always just really loved his music and aspects of him. But in recent years, he's said some things and done some things that have been sort of confusing to me and maybe a little bit disappointing. So I guess I've kind of distanced myself a bit from him, or I guess you could say we've been on a break. So it'll be, it was interesting to, hear what he's up to now and see if we can rekindle the romance.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. Some of that history you kind of dive into has cost him a couple record deals. In fact, the first new single he released was way back in 2022 with Rebels Without Applause.
No more to give, too late to live. Last on the bill, I see them still. Rebels without applause.
And then that album, and I think the other album after that, ended up getting canceled as he lost his record deal because of his comments and everything. And we also know his history about his live shows, where the joke is Morrissey's probably not going to show up. But he did release this album, so let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to kick things off with the first track, You're Right, It's Time.
You're right, it's time. You're right, it's time.
The album opens in a fairly restrained way. Instead of launching into something big and dramatic, Morrissey opts for a slow build that immediately creates a reflective mood. The guitars sit back in the mix while the rhythm section quietly drives the song forward, giving it kind of a late night atmosphere. Lyrically, it feels like Morrissey's taking stock of where things stand, personally, culturally, and maybe even artistically. There's a sense of regret in the way that he delivers certain lines, but there's also a bit of defiance underneath it. His voice still carries that dramatic weight, and the subtle arrangement on this track allows it to sit right at the center of the track. It's not the most explosive opener he's ever done, but it works well as a tone setter. By the time the song fades out, you just get the sense that this album's going to be maybe a bit more about reflection.
Yeah, this sounded very familiar to me. This was a Morrissey, and I guess a more mature Morrissey, as you said, reflecting on his life. I'm a sucker for this kind of thing, and he did pull me in. It plays like a conversation with maybe a long suffering friend or lover telling him that it's time to move on, whether that's from an era, a fight, or even his public persona. And it seems like Morrissey's kind of half accepting the idea or half arguing the idea. This is a pretty strong track, I think, to open the record with, and I do think it sets the tone for the album.
Well, let's move into track number 2, Makeup is a Lie.
She said, makeup is a lie. Oh, makeup is a lie. Oh, makeup is a lie.
The title track brings a slightly stronger groove. There's a hypnotic rhythm running underneath the song, and the guitars feel more textured and layered here. It gives that track a kind of dreamy but slightly uneasy atmosphere. The lyrics revolve around the idea of appearances versus reality, something Morrissey has always been fascinated by. The phrase "makeup is a lie" works both internally and metaphorically as he leans into that uncertainty. It could be about vanity, about deception, or maybe even about the way people construct public identities. The chorus repeats the central phrase enough that it sticks in your head. It's almost like a mantra. It's not necessarily the catchiest song on the album, but the mood it creates is really effective. It feels mysterious and a little bit theatrical, which is where Morrissey often sounds the most comfortable.
Yeah, this album features 4 different co-writers with Morrissey. This is the second track in a row by Camilla Gray. And, if you do listen closely, I think you can kind of notice, who's, who the co-writer is on each track. This is, one of those rare occasions, I think, when Morrissey maybe has a little bit of a electronic or maybe a trip-hop vibe underneath. And I always like it when he deviates a little bit from that typical sort of jangly guitar pop. But yeah, it seems to tell like a surreal story about, I think, a woman in Paris trying to deliver him a message even after death. At least that's kind of what I'm taking away from it. But there's this repeated mantra, makeup is a lie, which is again, feels like a very typical Morrissey track to me. And I guess it can challenge a listener's tolerance for repetition, which Morrissey often, likes has done a lot throughout his career, just repeating a line over and over. But yeah, another interesting and, again, typical Morrissey track.
Let's see what our thoughts are about track number 3, Notre Dame.
Notre Dame, we will not be silent. Notre Dame, we will not be silent before investigations. They said there's nothing to see here.
This song immediately stands out because it's one of the darker imagery and heavier songs on the album. The instrumentation feels more dramatic here, with the guitars that echo and swirl in the background, while the rhythm section keeps everything moving forward. Morrissey paints a fairly bleak picture lyrically, referencing deconstruction and cultural decline. The song carries a sense of mourning for something that's been lost. But really what makes this track works for me is the atmosphere. It feels almost cinematic at times, like it could be playing over the closing scenes of a film. Morrissey leans into that drama with his vocal delivery, stretching certain phrases in a way that gives the song a haunting quality. For me, it's one of the more memorable moments on the album because it balances strong imagery with a compelling musical backdrop.
Yeah, this one actually features the return of Alan White, who worked with Morrissey, back beginning I think in 1992 with Your Arsenal. So he's back in the fold, and this is one of the more interesting musical tracks on the album. Although this is I'm not sure exactly where Morrissey is going with this lyrically. I've seen some people suspecting that maybe this delves into some conspiracy theory about Muslims being responsible for the burning of the Notre Dame cathedral. So I don't know, but beyond that, I do like the gothic feel of it and the romantic fatalism. So it's a strong track, I think. So the next track is actually a cover, Amazona.
Why don't you step through the mirror and see from Arizona to El Dorado? Sure is such a long way. Something wrong.
Amazona was a Roxy Music track from the album Stranded.
Why don't you step through the mirror and see from Arizona?
This one, leans into the song's kind of glam rock, art rock weirdness rather than smoothing it out. Just kind of shimmery guitar. There's a funky pulse to it. And Morrissey, does a pretty good, Brian Ferry impression, or I guess he, borrows some of Brian Ferry's style while still being Morrissey. I think it's a successful cover, although I'm not sure that I love its inclusion on the album.
Well, Don, this one was a bit of a curveball for me listening to the album. I did not expect Morrissey to be covering this Roxy Music song. Something I haven't said in quite a while on the podcast. One of our old co-hosts used to steal my notes. Don, I think you just did the exact same thing on this song. It's an interesting choice. I think for a cover, you can kind of hear the influences Roxy Music had on him. But at the same time, I kind of like how Morrissey tries to give this just enough of his own personality to try to make this feel at home on the record. It does feel slightly out of place in the placement, in my opinion, just from what we've heard before, and really what's going to be coming afterwards.
So the next track is Headache. It features another co-writer, Gustavo Manzur. It sits somewhere between moody mid-tempo rock and late 90s trip rock, swirling keys, a queasy harmonic palette, if you will. But, the headache sounds like it's presented almost as if he's marrying a headache, which gets a little confusing, but it's interesting. But it seems to deal with aspects of media noise, personal disappointments, and the grind of aging in public, and all of it pressing on the narrator. It's not the flashiest track, but it adds to the record's overarching sense of like a slow burn pressure.
You really summed that up. This is a slow burn kind of track. Things really slow down and it settles into a dreamy, almost hazy soundscape. I like how the guitars shimmer quietly while the rhythm section stays understated. It gives Morrissey plenty of space vocally. The arrangement really has a nice atmosphere to it, and that melody carries that slightly melodic feel that Morrissey does so well. In fact, Don, I really enjoyed everything about this track. For most of its runtime, it felt like it was going to end up being one of my favorite songs on the album. But then we get to that final minute of the track, and the song really takes a turn. The song closes with Morrissey repeating the phrase, "I don't like you," over and over and over and over again. It goes on for nearly like the last minute of the track. To me, I didn't know if Morrissey's trying to way to close out the track. Maybe he's directing that, like you said, at the media with he does not like them. But to repeat that over and over for almost a solid minute really deters from this track. For me, the repetition starts to wear out its welcome pretty quickly. It's one of those moments where the song may have been stronger if it had wrapped up just a little bit sooner.
All right, that takes us to the track Boulevard.
I just need one more reason to give up on God and every word he said. So help me, Boulevard. Boulevard, Boulevard.
I think this is one of the standout tracks for me. This is another Morrissey Alan White partnership built around a stately, almost cinematic chord progression. The song follows a character or characters walking some unnamed boulevard, their inner lives spilling into city lights and traffic noise. Melody is strong and bittersweet, and White's guitar work gives the track dynamics that many of the more groove-based songs, I think, lack on the album. I think this is one that could be a fan favorite.
Yeah, this track definitely feels like classic Morrissey territory. The jingly guitars and the sweepy chords create a sound that longtime fans will recognize immediately. This song also does have a good cinematic quality to it, something Morrissey's been good at capturing, that feeling of solitude in crowded places, and this track taps into that theme really well. Melodically, it's one of the most accessible songs on the album. The chorus is memorable without being over dramatic, and the arrangement slightly builds in a way that keeps the song engaging from start to finish. For me, this may not be the flashiest track here, but it's the kind of song that grows stronger with repeat listens.
Okay, Zoom Zoom the Little Boy.
Zoom, zoom, the little boy, he only thinks about joy. Zoom, zoom, the little boy, he only thinks about joy. He wants to save every animal from the arrogant human.
Reintroduces us to another longtime Morrissey collaborator, Jesse Tobias, who's been a guitarist in his band and co-writer since, I think, ringleader of the Tormentors back in, 2007, I think, with a title that sounds almost like a children's TV theme. It's a stranger track and darker than it at first appears. Musically, it's relatively brisk, driven by tight guitars and a playful, tumbling rhythm that borders on jaunty. Lyrically, though, it seems to fixate on a young boy observed from a distance, raising questions about innocence, voyeurism, and the way adults just project narratives onto children. It's always interesting, when Morrissey comments on children, which he does, a lot in his career. It might seem silly at times, but the hook actually kind of sticks in my head. That's one that's been playing in my brain for much of the week.
Musically, it has more of an upbeat rhythm compared to the surrounding tracks, which creates an interesting contrast with the lyrics. As with many Morrissey songs, there's a mixture of humor, commentary, woven into the narrative. Fans of his more eccentric songwriting will probably appreciate this one the most. It feels like a reminder that Morrissey has always enjoyed throwing unexpected ideas into his music, just to see how the listeners react.
All right, and then we have another Jesse Tobias collaboration, The Night Pop Dropped.
Remembering the night pop dropped, how empty life would be if we had never known. So sad for me, for us, so sad for the universe, so sad for me.
And so I think pop could be a dad figure, but I think it's also a reference to pop music. Maybe perhaps the idea of pop collapsing, whether as an industry, a culture, or a personal lifeline. It's a sturdy rock foundation, singable chorus. Morrissey's voice, I think, actually sounds pretty strong now as he's getting up there in years. He's still, sounds like he's been working on it and keeping it vital. But so I think it almost seems like a reference to the Smiths track Rubber Ring when he talks about the songs that saved your life. This seems to be kind of in there, the idea that the songs that saved you stop getting played, and that there's a sense of loss with that. At least that's my interpretation anyway. But I think this is a pretty emotionally resonant song.
The band sounds more energized here, with sharper guitars and a rhythm section that pushes the song forward. Morrissey seems to be reflecting on a time when pop culture felt more meaningful or more exciting, and contrasting with what he sees today. The melody is strong. The chorus carries a sense of urgency that some of the other tracks initially avoided. Yeah, kind of song, as you used to say, I kind of dig it.
Okay. So next track is Kerching, Kerching.
Ka-ching, ka-ching, ching, ching. She's the lover you can never leave. She tells you you're not good enough, not rich enough, not man enough, not fast enough, not you enough. You don't joke enough, 'cause you just do not take coke enough. Ka-ching, 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 ching, ching.
As the title suggests, it seems to be a message against commerce and commodification, with the repeated kerching mimicking the sounds of a cash register. Musically, it's slightly bouncy, almost sing-song. Gives the lyrics cynicism, a coating of sugar. It's short and sharp, satirical, kind of funny. Again, very much, within it's kind of typical Morrissey shtick.
You're right. I found the song to take aim at society's obsession with money and material success. Morrissey's touched on these themes before, but he approaches it here with more of a mix of sarcasm and frustration. The music has a slightly heavier groove, almost glam rock in places, which gives the song a bit more bite. The rhythm section locks in a steady pulse while the guitars add flashes of attitude around the edges. And what stood out to me most was the tone of the lyrics. Morrissey doesn't sound shocked by greed or excess. He sounds tired of it. That sense of wary commentary gives the song its personality.
The next track is Lester Bangs.
How does it feel to be you? Oh, Lester Bangs. How does it feel to be you? Lester Bangs. 3,000 miles away. This nerd hangs on your word.
It's a tribute to the late rock critic Lester Bangs. It's fascinating because Morrissey is somebody who's had an interesting relationship with critics over the years, but here he seems to really be capturing that relationship that a young music fan might have with a critic. It's almost like it's kind of a long distance relationship between the singer and the critic. There's the line, "The nerd hangs on your every word." Perhaps an album nerd. It casts Bangs as an unlikely emotional anchor for a disillusioned youth. Yeah, this reminds me of another track years ago about Christian Dior. Very similar vibe. But yeah, musically, it's one of the more straightforward ballads here. It's not too over dramatic. Overall, I'd say it's a nice tribute to a famous music journalist.
Yeah, I found this track to be one of the more intriguing songs on the album because it references the legendary rock critic Lester Bangs. Rather than simply writing a tribute, Morrissey seems to reflect on the role music critics once played in the shaping culture of the industry. There's a nostalgic tone running throughout the song, like he's personally remembering a time when music journalism carried a bit more influence and personality. Musically, the track feels warm and melodic, almost gentle compared to some of the sharper moments earlier in the album. It's a thoughtful song that will resonate with longtime music fans who appreciate the history behind it.
All right, the penultimate track is called Many Icebergs Ago.
With a tight, sullen mouth, you firmly said no. Many no's ago. In the Dundee arms, I said, my wood withers on a stern. You said, yes, we know. Many icebergs ago.
Another collaboration with Gustavo Manzur. This is another one of my favorites. It's a very epic track, over 5 minutes. Morrissey voice sounds excellent and dramatic. Kind of plays, I guess it's sort of climate imagery, but it's, the lyrics are a mix of, personal loss, environmental dread, and, some barbed asides, I think, in there. The keyboards and textures almost capture sort of the idea of a glacial movement. It's a mood piece, and I think it's with kind of a haunted sprawl. I'm a big fan of this track.
The arrangement on this track builds slowly, starting with minimal instrumentation before we gradually expand into something fuller. The title suggests distance and time, and the lyrics follow that idea. Morrissey seems to be looking back at past experiences and relationships with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. Vocally, he sounds particularly expressive here. There's a vulnerability in his performance that adds emotional depth to the song. It's the kind of track that quietly sticks with you after the album ends.
The album ends with The Monsters of Pig Alley.
We'd say, the monsters of Pig Alley say, why don't you give it a rest and come back home? We're trapped and we moan, but we're all your own, and we love
another one co-written by Alan White. I think he saves the best for last here. This really feels like a classic Morrissey single. You know, I'm reminded of Every Day is Like Sunday or the first of the gang to die. The name The Monsters of Pig Alley, I guess, takes its name from a 1912 D.W. Griffith film, turns it into a metaphor for thugs, bullies, or perhaps the more abstract monsters of public life. The writing seems muscular and cinematic, but, very pleasing to the ear. Morrissey plays with the idea of who the real monsters are in life. Yeah, I mean, I was really, surprised to have such a strong track at the end.
Don, I agree with you. I think this is one of the best tracks on the album, and it does show up here at the end, and what a way to close out the album. And the album does close out with one of its most theatrical tracks. The arrangement is bigger and more dramatic, giving Morrissey room to deliver a final performance that feels intentionally grand. Lyrically, the song reads like a commentary on society's strange cast of characters, from fame seekers, cultural figures, and the spectacle of modern life. It's a fitting subject for Morrissey, who's spent decades observing and critiquing the world around him. As a closing track, I found it to leave the album on a slightly mysterious note. Rather than wrapping things up nicely, it feels more like Morrissey stepping back and letting the listener draw their own conclusions. So, Don, overall, this album, Makeup Is a Lie, may not end up being considered one of the most absolute classics in Morrissey's catalog, but there's still quite a bit here to dig into. Throughout the album, he moves between introspective moments, sharp social commentary, and the kind of dramatic storytelling that's always been a big part of what makes his music so distinctive. And like most Morrissey releases, it's probably going to divide listeners. Some songs will resonate more with others depending on what you're looking for him at this stage of his career. But one thing this album shows is that even this far into his career, Morrissey can still make music that gets people talking. And I'll admit, I really enjoyed this album. And in fact, after spending some time with it, it's one of the albums that I could easily see landing somewhere in my top 10 albums of the year.
Yeah, I wasn't sure quite what to expect. I wondered if, after years of, losing record deals and canceled concerts and protests outside his concerts, if this would be some grand defiant, perhaps an F you, I'm still here. There might be a few hints of that, but they're all pretty subtle. And this feels more just typical of, most of the albums that he's put out in the 2000s. Some good songwriting, maybe a bit uneven, but there's some great moments. And even at his worst, Morrissey is an interesting character. So this is definitely worth a listen.
You're listening to the New Wave Music Podcast. Now, let's take a look at what's new in the world of music news.
First up, Robyn Hitchcock has released a brand new single called I Am This Thing.
I say what I say in words. I love the music of the birds. I grew from seed, a fleshy seed. I am alone in thought and deed. I am this thing. I am this thing. I am this. How's about you?
The track is the first taste of his upcoming album, The Confuser, which is scheduled to arrive on July 24th, 2026. Meanwhile, Trashcan Sinatras have dropped another new single called Bad Husband.
I could play with a little more style. Bad husband.
band has also confirmed that the brand new album is on the way. The album's going to be called Ever the Optimist, and it's currently set for release July 31st, 2026. Next up, Midge Ure has confirmed details about his long-awaited new album. The record is called A Man of Two Worlds, and it's set to be released May 8th, 2026. The album will be divided into two distinct halves. What he's calling World 1 will feature 8 instrumental pieces, while World 2 will consist of 8 brand new vocal tracks. Right now you can check out the first single from the album, Just Words. In other news, Michael Stipe of REM has shared his first new song in years. The track is called I Played the Fool.
I played the fool. I laugh at me, I'm trying, falling sometimes flying. Cry me an ocean of one-liners, cruel. Sticks and stones, you know the rhyme. You know it landed hard this time.
And it serves as the theme song for the HBO series Rooster. We've got new music from Peter Gabriel. He just released the second single from his upcoming album that will release later this year. The new single is called What Lies Ahead.
You see the world now all connected, flowing as a brain. You see the world the way it will be, unfolding in your hands. What lies ahead?
And finally, closing out the news this week, a band I honestly didn't expect to hear new material from anytime soon, Kon Kan is back. Barry Harris has confirmed that a brand new Kon Kan album is on the way later this year, and he's already released a few singles. The most recent single he just released is Not This One.
But not this one.
That's a wrap on music news. Now let's get back into our next album review.
All right, Donald, let's take a look at our next album. We're going to be diving into the latest from the Charlatans. You may remember the Charlatans with their hits such as The Only One I Know, North Country Boy,
How many years was the younger half? I know she hears you cry, I know she hears you laugh. And itchy and stretchy come rolling up the alley. If it'll be good, I'll be good to your daddy. Who loves you, but I bet it's not the same. It's your North Country Boy.
and Weirdo.
Most of the time you're demanding, what am I doing here? I don't wanna be in the hurts in which you bear. You can say goodbye to this one. Look at your own shame.
The Charlatans released their brand new album, We Are Loved, which is their 14th studio album. This was released late last year in 2025. Now, Don, one question I heard you say on your Album Nerds podcast is you weren't sure why the Charlatans dropped the UK from their name here in the US. Well, I really wasn't sure on that either, and I'm sure half our listeners aren't, so I'm going to give you a little history or a little bit of background from what I found.
Thank you.
As we know, the Charlatans started gaining attention in the late 80s, early 90s. They had to use the name The Charlatans UK in the United States because there was a band from the 1960s called The Charlatans. They held the rights to the name in the US. Because of that, the Charlatans, the British band of the Charlatans, had to add UK to avoid lawsuits. Legal issues were eventually resolved, and they were able to drop the UK suffix and simply go back to being the Charlatans. The band themselves never really liked the extra label anyway. In fact, frontman Tim Burgess once joked that if anything, he should call the band the Charlatans the World. And interesting, like we kind of said, even after they dropped it, many fans, especially here in the US, still refer to them as the Charlatans UK, mostly out of habit.
Yep. So the opening cut is called Kingdom of Ours, O-U-R-S.
Hello there, I've been waiting. The credits are rolling. I'm yours for the taking. Silently dissipating. Subjects conflating. There's no persuading.
Opens the album with a confident mid-tempo swagger that feels like classic Charlatans. You've got some organ swirl going on, chiming guitar, and a rhythm section that locks into a steady rolling groove. Burgess sounds relaxed and conversational, almost like he's easing you into the record rather than trying to knock you over with a big, obvious single. The lyric sketches out a shared emotional territory, this kingdom that belongs to the people in the song rather than to any larger system, which fits the record's recurring theme of small communities and chosen families, I think. It's not flashy, but as an opener, it quietly sets the tone, warmth, momentum, and a band playing to their collective strengths.
Yeah, I liked how this album starts out with a laid-back groove and slowly builds as guitars and keyboards drift in and out of the mix. It feels spacious and atmospheric, almost like the band intentionally leaves the room for listeners to settle into the record. What stood out most to me was the reflective mood of the song. There's a sense of perspective here, something like the band is looking back at the journey that they've taken over the years. Tim Burgess' vocal delivery is relaxed and confident, which adds to the feeling that the band is comfortable where they are creatively. It's not a huge, explosive opener, but it works because it draws you into the album gradually.
So next is the title track, We Are Love.
Ever present, warm and available. My glass half empty, yours half full. You got me acting irrational. This is the place. These are the days. We are loved.
The title track is the album's most outright euphoric moment, and that euphoria that I think the Charlatans have always been so good at capturing. Kind of breezy, open-top car song, which I think Burgess has used that description before. The rhythm section pushes a bit harder here, and the chorus lifts with a classic, I guess maybe like a festival-ready sing-along hook that still manages to feel modest and human scale. Lyrically, it walks a line between direct positivity and something more wistful. We Are Loved sounds like both a declaration and an attempt to convince yourself it's true. There's a subtle psychedelic shimmer in the guitars and keys echoing their 90s heyday, but the production is very clean and contemporary.
The title track quickly becomes one of the defining moments of the album. There's an uplifting energy here that immediately grabs your attention. The guitars sparkle, the rhythm section drives the song forward, and the keyboards add to that unmistakable Charlatans texture that longtime fans will recognize instantly. Lyrically, the song leans into themes of connection and positivity, but it never feels overly sentimental. After decades together as a band, the message feels believable. The chorus has that wide, open feel that makes it easy to imagine the song becoming a standout moment in their live shows.
All right, that takes us to Many a Day, a Heartache.
I just wanted to see how high I could fly. My feet don't ever really touch the ground. Many a day a heartache. Many a day a heartache.
another reflective track. Leans into a soul-inflected side of the band, I think. Warm keys, gently pulsing bass, and a vocal that leads into phrasing more than power. And the melody circles around the title phrase, giving the sense of someone taking stock of all the accumulated bumps and bruises we get in life, and sinking into regret. It's musically, it's understated but melodic, kind of song that doesn't scream for attention on first listen, but maybe sneaks up on you and becomes a favorite. Maybe it's kind of a counterweight or counterpoint to the bright glow of We Are Loved.
To me, I found the song shifting the album more into an introspective space. The song carries a slightly nostalgic tone, almost like the band reflecting on memories from the early chapters of their career. The arrangement is understated, allowing the melody and lyrics to carry the emotional weight here. One of the things that makes this track work is how naturally it unfolds. Nothing feels forced or overproduced. Instead, it has that easy, flowing quality that comes from musicians who know how to let the song breathe. It's not the flashiest moment on the album, but it quietly becomes one of the more emotionally resolute tracks.
Okay. For the girls,
I have a long way to go in this patience game. Further down the road, the signal fades. Darling, you see my scars, and I've seen yours. Holding yourself, yes, it's worth it for the girls, for the girls.
is a more, I guess, ambitious or progressive track. They stretch out a bit, both in length and arrangement. The groove is insistent but unhurried, giving Rogers room to color the spaces with organ and piano, while Collins leads into a more lyrical guitar line. Burgess's lyrics feel like a loose dedication, a song about women he's known, loved, admired, or perhaps failed. And there's a slightly bittersweet tinge beneath the surface. The chorus feels designed to drift out over a crowd, but the verse keeps things grounded with a specific anecdotal detail. It's one of the record's emotional anchors, I think, and I can imagine it, being a great live track.
The song feels almost like a tribute, kind of like you said, whether it's past relationships, current friends, or people that support you behind the scenes. Musically, it's built around a steady groove, with guitars and keyboards blending together in a smooth, melodic way. And I found there's something comforting about this track. It's not trying to be a huge anthem or radio hit. Instead, it focuses on creating a heartfelt atmosphere. The chorus is simple but effective, and I found that simplicity to work in its favor. This is actually one of the standout tracks I felt on the album.
All right, so next is You Can't Push the River.
You trace my lips with your fingertips, just something taking me over, pushing the river, your ego moving it slowly, taking me over, you can't push the river.
It's one of the more obvious message songs, I think, built around the idea that life and relationships move at their own pace. The arrangement is lean and slightly tighter than the surrounding tracks. It's got a springy rhythm that keeps it from turning into a slow ballad. Burgess sings the title line almost like advice he's giving to his younger self. And you can hear some of the late career perspective throughout. So if the metaphor isn't exactly new, the band's, subtle dynamic shifts keep it from feeling heavy-handed.
I found this to be one of the most thoughtful songs on the album. The title alone carries a strong message about patience and letting life unfold naturally. And the music I found to mirror that idea perfectly. The tempo is relaxed, the arrangement leaves plenty of space between the instruments. The song has that almost meditative quality. As it progresses, small musical details begin to stand out, such as a subtle keyboard line, gentle guitar textures, and a rhythm section that keeps everything grounded. It's the kind of track that reveals more with repeated listens. And that's going to take us to the next track, Deeper and Deeper.
I was feeling weaker.
found this track tapping into that classic Charlatans sound that fans know so well. The groove is strong, the Hammond organ sits right in the center of the mix. The guitars add layers of texture around it. There's that sense of movement throughout the track that the band is gradually building intensity as the song unfolds. What makes this one stand out is how immersive it feels. The production creates depth, pulling listeners in to the song rather than just presenting it on the surface. It's one of the tracks that really showcases the band's ability to blend atmosphere with groove.
Yeah, the title hints at a descent, and it really does feel like things are getting a little darker here. The minor keys, slightly heavier drums, and a bass line that's more rumbly rather than a glide. Despite that, though, it's not really a stormy song. I guess just sort of moody, maybe a bit hypnotic. You've got these repeating keyboard figures giving it a mild, almost like krautrock sort of undercurrent. Lyrically, it deals with getting pulled further into something like love, obsession, memory, more so than you intended, without, clearly labeling whether that's a good or bad thing. I think that the tension between the steady groove and the lyrical, I guess, ambivalence gives the track a pull.
All right, and that's going to take us to the next track, Appetite. This song, I felt, injects just a bit more energy into the album. The rhythm section has a lively bounce to it, and the song carries a slightly playful spirit compared to some of the more reflective tracks that we've heard earlier on the record. There's a youthful quality here that feels refreshing. Even after decades together, the band still sounds energized and engaged. The melody is catchy without feeling forced, and the instrumentation keeps the song moving forward with a steady pace.
Yeah, Appetite feels like the closest thing here to the Charlatans' more overtly dance-friendly side. There's a propulsive beat and a bass line that pushes things forward. Burgess rides the groove with rhythmic vocal lines in the verses, and then the melody opens up in the chorus. I guess it seems to be about wanting more of life, wanting more connection and more experience. And the band matches that hunger with a track that sounds like movement. It breaks up the more reflective midsection of this record and keeps, I guess we're in the back half of the album, from getting too mellow.
Don, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on the next track, Saltwater.
Salt water, love the taste of salt water, 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 salt water. Love the taste of salt water.
This song slows the tempo down quite a bit and shifts into a softer, more atmospheric style. On its own, it's not necessarily a bad song. The arrangement is stripped back and dreamy with a calmer, reflective tone that leans more towards maybe a folk influenced sound with a little bit of you can hear waves crashing in the background. That said, for me, this is where the pacing of the album starts to feel off. Up until this point, the record flows nicely between reflective moments and groove-driven tracks, but Saltwater feels like it suddenly drops off into a completely different sonic space. Production and style just didn't quite match the mood the rest of the album has built, and because of that, this is really the one track on the record that didn't land for me. It feels sonically out of place compared to everything around it. It disrupts the momentum the album had going, and it's honestly a track on future listens I'm going to skip.
That's interesting, Steve. You're right about it, sort of disrupting the pace and feel of the record. But I actually liked it kind of as an interlude or a palate cleanser, if you will. So as you said, it's built more around atmospheric textures, synths, and treated guitars. Burgess's presence is lighter here, making it feel more like a band instrumental sketch that made the record because it captured a mood. The title suggests tears or the sea, and the music hints at both. both. It's a brief drifting piece that, I think it gives the album, some space to breathe before, we get back to the more fully formed songs. I think in the flow of the album, it works as a reset. I
guess that's a good way to look at it. I did not think about a reset or palate cleanser, but I think it's one of those we're going to be on opposite ends of the spectrum on that one. That's why we do this.
Yep.
Well, let's see what our thoughts are on the next track, Out on Our Own.
We are sarcastic and so romantic. Now we have grown out on our own. Out on our own.
This song carries a strong sense of independence and self-reflection. The groove is steady and understated, allowing the lyrics to take center stage. There's a subtle confidence running throughout the song that feels very natural. Rather than relying on a big hook, this track builds its appeal through atmosphere and mood. The band sounds completely comfortable here, and that ease comes through in the performance.
Yeah, Out on Your Own brings back the full band feel. It's spacious, big arrangement, ringing guitars, organ swells, in a rhythm that's steady but not rushed. It's an anthemic track, I think, built around the idea of standing apart from systems or expectations, and maybe finding solidarity in doing so. Burgess's vocal is really strong here. It sounds a little weathered, but it's also hopeful. I really like it. And as the record starts, heading towards its conclusion, this feels like the emotional culmination of the we, I think, that's, throughout this album.
Well, as we start to close down the album, we get to the next track, Glad You Grabbed Me. This song I really enjoyed. The lyrics suggest a reflection on friendship, relationships, and moments that shaped your life. There's a warmth to this song that makes it feel sincere rather than sentimental. Musically, it's built around a melodic structure that allows the band's signature sound to shine through. The keyboards and the guitars blend beautifully, creating a rich backdrop for the vocals. It's a song that this deep into the album, to me, is one of the highlights.
Yeah, the end of this album is really strong, I think. Despite the awkward title of "Glad You Grabbed Me," this is a very charming, personal sounding song. Evokes the idea of someone pulling you out of a darker period, grabbing you before you disappear in your own head or something. It's upbeat without being brash, playful keyboard touches, some nice backing vocals as well. But yeah, it seems to be a song about gratitude, that doesn't get, trite or saccharine. It still has a grit in it. So I really like this track.
That brings us to the final track on the album, Now Everything. The closing song on this album is a fitting conclusion to the record. The song has a gentle, uplifting quality that brings the album full circle. Instead of ending with something loud or dramatic, the band chooses a quieter, more reflective finish, and the melody carries a sense of resolution, almost like the band acknowledging the journey that they've taken together. It leaves the listener with a feeling of calm and appreciation, which feels very much in line with the overall tone of the album.
Yeah, this is again, they're stretching out a little bit more. I think this one's coming in around 7 minutes. It's But it's a slow builder, and I think it's an effective closing track. The layers of guitar and keys gradually thickening the atmosphere. Burgess sounds, I don't know, I guess kind of meditative, reflecting on time, change, and the way everything, can feel like too much or also not enough. Some clever lyrics in there. As an ending, it feels more like a subtle coda rather than going out on like a big, obvious finale. It sort of drifts away with them, which I think suits the album's sort of understated confidence. I think a strong closer.
Don, for the most part, I found this album to flow really well. There's a sense of maturity and confidence in the songwriting that comes across most of the record. That said, the album isn't completely without its rough spots. For me, the song Saltwater was a real misstep, but even with that one stumble, We Are Loved still lands as a solid record from the band that continues to evolve while staying true to their core sound. After more than 3 decades together, the Charlatans still know how to craft songs that feel thoughtful, melodic, and unmistakably their own.
This is the sound of a long-running band leaning into what they do best. Warm grooves, organ haze, and gently anthemic choruses without coasting. It's an easy record to live with, and if they're not trying to reinvent the wheel, it reminds you why this particular wheel has been turning for so long. So as I say on the Album Nerds podcast sometimes, Donnie Likey.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the New Wave Music Podcast. Looking ahead to our next couple episodes, the next episode, I'm going to be joined by Deborah Isles from Romeo Void. She's going to be stopping by the New Wave Studios to discuss the band's upcoming record store release. We're also going to dive into the history of the band, and she's also going to talk about some other projects she's been involved in. It was a great interview. I think you guys will like that one. And Dawn, looking ahead to our next album review episode, we're going to be taking a look at an album that was over 50 years in the making, the brand new album from Squeeze, as well as the highly anticipated new album from Joe Jackson. If this is your first time listening, we thank you and ask that you please subscribe. That's a great way to support us. And if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search for New Wave Music Podcast. We'll catch you on the next episode.